everyone, and welcome to the Encounters Film Festival Q&A on the film Trade Secrets. I'm joined today by Sean Swingler and Christopher Clark, the directors of the film. Christopher is a multimedia journalist and filmmaker covering underreported social issues, mainly across Southern and Central Africa. His writing, films, and photography have been commissioned by leading international outlets, including Al Jazeera, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. Sean Swingler is a documentary filmmaker and cinematographer based in Cape Town. His work focuses on the intersections between security, illicit trades, organized crime, and the environment, working predominantly across sub-Saharan Africa. And his work has also appeared on BBC, CNN, and Time, many, many more. Christopher, Sean, how are you guys?
Great, thank you, Talia. Thank you so much for having us.
Very good, thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So your guys' film, Trade Secrets, to give the audience a bit of an overview. When we watch Trade Secrets, we learn about how the drug trade in Africa operates, from the southern tip of Africa to Kenya. And in the film, we follow addicts, we follow dealers, we follow community activists from various cultures, classes, and religions. And when watching the film, you really do get a sense that it sheds a sensitive, honest spotlight on the destructive nature of drugs across Africa. And I think where the documentary really shines is the respectful manner in which it humanizes everyone involved. So off that little introduction, I wanted to ask the first question, which is, give us a little bit of background on the project, how it all came about, what was the original inspiration?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that, Talia. A little bit of background on the project. It formed part of a series of films that Chris and I were commissioned to produce for an illicit trades research organization called the Global Initiative, based in Geneva. And they commissioned us to produce these films to supplement research reports that they're doing on these particular topics. And Trade Secrets forms part of the work that we did for Global Initiative on a number of drug reports that they were producing in Eastern and Southern Africa. And so that was the impetus for this particular project, and grateful to the Global Initiative for seeing the value in supporting mediums like this and supporting short documentary in trying to tell slightly more complex and nuanced stories with some meaningful access.
Cool. And because of Global Initiative, they really took what you could call a risk, because they're funding something that's not necessarily safe and easy to do. So Sean, you were on the ground with everyone, with all of the subjects, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But Chris, I wanted to ask, what was the experience like working remotely in terms of the scripting and then the edit process?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting process because, as Sean says, we were commissioned to do a series of films for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, is the full name. And it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, essentially. So I think at that stage, we weren't really sure how frequently we were going to be able to be on the ground, either of us or both of us. And for me in particular, being kind of stuck outside of Africa for most of last year, outside of South Africa and outside of the continent in general, it was definitely initially quite daunting, but ultimately like a very good learning experience and quite eye-opening to kind of see how much you can get done remotely. And I think it just in some ways helps you to kind of crystallize certain elements of the vision that you're trying to get across, because you have to be able to articulate it without being there on the ground. So you I think you get into quite a good mode of kind of figuring out what it is you're trying to do, because you're having to relay that to people without being there. Yeah. Obviously, Sean and I have worked on a lot of stuff, so that's pretty easy. I think we have a good understanding and rapport, but there were other films that we did throughout that process, where we were working with people that were on the ground that we hadn't worked with before. And so you really do have to be able to kind of articulate what you're trying to do very clearly. So as much as I love being on the ground and it's kind of part of the fun, it was definitely an interesting challenge and a good learning experience to kind of do it from afar.
That's so cool to hear, and it's amazing that, you know, even with the pandemic, you guys were able to pull this off. Because, you know, bigger productions have struggled even more. You know, but it's fantastic to see that the collaboration could still continue. And on that point, Sean, when you're on the ground, you interviewing the subjects, you've got to make a lot of, you know, snappy decisions. What was that process like? How did you choose who to interview? And what was the process of interviewing them like? Was it a relatively relaxed environment or a little bit shaky?
Sure. So I think our primary goal when trying to sort of really trying to figure out who we could work with on this film was we relied a lot on our collaboration with the Global Initiative and with the wonderful field workers that they have on the ground throughout the continent. And in the case of our film with Kenya and Malawi, we relied a lot on work that they had already done. And basically what we did when we sort of arrived on the ground, my sort of producer, Joe Minnick, and I would speak to the field workers and to try and get a sense of who we could talk to spend, and who we could spend meaningful time with, who we could, I guess, spend time outside of just a parachute in interview and leave type scenario. We really tried to build scenes around the subjects in our films and to really get a little bit deeper. And that was our primary criteria when trying to find people to speak to, was really who would have us back again, who would allow us to visit again, really. Yeah. And so through working with Global Initiative's field workers and with Joe Minnick on the ground, that's how we approach that.
Okay, cool. So the locations where the interviews take place are quite evocative. You know, you've got the seedy rooms, the baby on the bed, you've got the back alley where the drugs are shown in all its, you know, glory. And firstly, in terms of pre-production, on Christopher's side, was this conscious decisions made by you to sort of place the subjects in these environments and emphasize it in the edit? And on Sean's side, was this something that on the ground you made happen with Global Initiative?
Sure. So I think from how we decided on where to spend our time with our characters was largely dependent, sort of determined by our characters. We wanted everyone that we spent time with to feel comfortable in their own spaces and in ways that felt authentic to them. So in the case of that room with the baby, that was Richard, one of our characters. That was his bedroom. And in the case of in the case of Hamed, that was his boat. And Hadida, those were the alleys that she spent her time in. We wanted to try and be as authentic to the story and to the people that we spent time with as possible, really. And it's logistically was a very challenging film to shoot, both in Kenya and in Malawi. It's a sensitive space, and it's difficult to it's where we spent our time was really informed by that, and trying to tread as lightly as we could and trying not to overproduce anything, really. I think in our experience has allowed for maybe as much comfort in front of the camera as possible.
Okay. And Chris, on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess that was also an interesting part of the process, the pre-planning for both of us, obviously planning from outside of the countries to begin with, is you know, you can have a very clear idea of what you want to achieve in theory, but it can often be very different on the ground. So I think both for the people on the ground and anyone not on the ground, i.e. myself, that there has to be a certain amount of leeway. It's good to have a kind of clear idea of your ideals, but also understanding that there are going to be certain times where you have to kind of roll with the punches or kind of adapt as possible. But I think just in general, on anything that we've worked on, both for Global Initiative and otherwise, it's just been really a kind of key factor for us has always been to try to really immerse people in the lives of the characters as much as possible. And as Sean says, it's also about making the characters feel comfortable and safe themselves, so that they behave more, or they not behave, but they are more natural on camera. And that because, you know, that comes across if people are uncomfortable, if they're feeling awkward, if they're feeling out of their element in some way, it's often evident. So we wanted to, I think we always want to make people feel comfortable, and also to make the audience feel that they are as immersed as possible in the world of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes across, and I think that what you're saying about the different perspectives that you come across in these documentaries, in your entire body of work, watching it, really, you do get a sense that there's a certain perspective, and you're not judging them. It's more showcasing what they're going through. And for me, it was very clear towards the end of the film, one of the subjects speaks to an imam and suggests a solution to the drug problem in Africa comes through community development. And I want to know from the filmmakers, having completed the film, having done similar work for most of your career, do you agree with her perspective? And what are your thoughts on the problem as a whole, showcased in the film? Christopher, you ready to say it?
I think it's, you know, it's something that I think as journalists and filmmakers in general, and I think also with the perspective that we try to come from, it's a tricky one. You know, it's I think to begin with is you're trying not to impose your own thoughts and feelings in a way, but inevitably people are going to ask you what you feel about it, and you will have feelings about it. Often by trying to take a very, you know, neutral approach as much as possible, those feelings will be very ambivalent. And I think this is also the case here. I think, you know, the community development, in the kind of broader sense of that, is definitely part of any solution. But I think it's such a multifaceted issue with many different aspects, social, economic, political, you know, otherwise, that I think it has to be a multi-pronged response. I think, you know, a big part of the issue in many African contexts remains that, you know, to a degree, there are certain taboos, and those taboos extend to government sometimes. So it's often dealt with as a kind of crime issue, if it's dealt with at all, rather than a health issue, for example, and definitely not a mental health issue often, when that is definitely sometimes the case. And I think that, you know, it's spoken about a bit in the film by some of the characters. There are a lack of services. You know, there are a lack of centers for people to seek help. People are criminalized, imprisoned for very minor infractions. They're not encouraged to get help. And ultimately, then you have a criminal record. We all know how these kind of things spiral. Then it's harder to get a job, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's also kind of evident in the lack often of research, in the lack of kind of proactive approach, not only from government but other actors. Part of it is that there's often a lack of funding. So I think there's just not enough will from a lot of different sectors at times. So I think there has to be a combination. There has to be a multi-pronged approach with all different kinds of actors involved.
Sean, your thoughts?
I think to really to repeat the point that treating drug abuse as a health issue and then often sometimes a mental health issue, rather than treating it as a crime, I think would go a really long way, and that definitely factors into a more holistic sort of look at why drug abuse occurs in communities. And I think that without putting words in Bernice's mouth, the character in our film that spoke to the Imam, that the harm reduction approach, the one that she works sort of quite strongly towards with her NGO in Kenya, there's a lot to be said for that approach to issues such as drug abuse. And that's something I think we feel quite strongly about.
Treating it as a health issue and not a crime issue. I think that was very clearly demonstrated when we have the characters taking drugs on screen, even at the beginning with the character on the boat, and he's taking the drugs on camera, and the first or second sentence out of his mouth is, you know, I hope God forgives me, I know God is there, and also speaking about the debilitating effects of what he's actually doing to himself. And you know, it's like using the drug use and drug trade in Africa to touch on these themes of religious guilt, to touch on poverty, to touch on all these different themes. And what I wanted to ask from Sean on the ground, when you're interviewing these subjects, was that something that you kind of had leading questions for, or was it something that they naturally came to that same conclusion by themselves?
Yeah, I'm very glad that you picked that up. And it came very naturally in our interviews. It was across the board in both countries, really. It was something that we picked up on as we sort of were going through the filming process and shooting our interviews, and knew to look out for, but something that came naturally kind of throughout. And tremendous guilt and tremendous stigmas and taboos around drug use. And I think in the case of Kenya, with the Lamu scenes in particular, a very Muslim coastal town that views drug use in a very particular way, that created a huge amount of guilt and stigma that I think just makes the whole process very complicated and very difficult. And this is something that we wanted to bring out, this the complexity in that space, and really how gray it all is. I think we like to think about life and the world in general in very black and white terms, but this was one of those where there's just a lot of gray in between.
Definitely. Chris, do you have any closing thoughts, and what would you like people to get out of viewing the film?
I think just to kind of reiterate some of what we've already been saying, I think that and also I guess just kind of adding to some of that as well, I think from the beginning it was very important to us that even though this is an incredibly sensitive issue, or there are many sensitive issues that are dealt with in this film, it was really important to us that we had people who were on camera, who you could see, who were not just kind of anonymous, hidden faces, people that you could connect with, who had names, who had faces, etc. And I think that in a way is kind of what we want people to take away, is the human face of it. It would have been very easy to get a bunch of kind of academic talking heads to talk about policy or whatever the case might be around drugs. But I think we often, we're talking about stigma and taboo and stuff on the ground in these environments, but I think it exists in all different kind of strata of society. And I think many of us in society in general do still hold a lot of prejudice and stereotypes that are often very harmful around drug use, drug abuse, drug users, drug sellers, people that exist in that world in some way. And I think it's, I hope that people can see the human face and find things that, feel empathy and affinity with the characters in some way.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much, Sean and Chris, for pulling through for the Q&A and for all your insightful answers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. And for the audience out there, please do check out globalinitiative.net. Their fascinating research should be more appreciated by the general public. You can see more of their work over there. And also check out Sean and Chris's websites, seanswingler.com and christopherclarkjournalist.com for more of their work. And from Encounter's side, we'd like to thank our sponsors and our partners for the festival. If you'd like to know anything more about the festival, the program, the films we're going to be showing, as well as get more information on trade secrets, please check out our website, encounters.co.za, and check us out on social media. And as always, Encounters will see you virtually everywhere. Thank you.